Story 1. They say every house has a heartbeat, some steady, some faint, and others that never truly die. The old house I lived in as a teenager had one that seemed to echo in its walls. It wasn't loud, but it was always there, like a slow, uncertain rhythm under the creaking floors and the soft sighs of old wood expanding with the weather. I used to brush it off, thinking it was just what old houses did, until one afternoon when something happened that made me question everything I thought I knew about what's real and what isn't. I was 15 then, and we had just moved into a house that had been standing since the late 1800s. It had this faded charm to it, the kind you only see in old photographs. Every corner seemed to have its own story. The walls were thick and cool to the touch, and sometimes when I walked through the hallway, I could smell something faintly metallic, almost like rust or old iron. I didn't pay much attention at first. I was too focused on settling into my new room and getting used to the strange groans the house made at night. The kitchen was my favorite spot because it had a big window that overlooked the backyard. The sunlight came in slanted beams, cutting through the dust that never seemed to leave the air, no matter how many times I wiped the counters. There was a wooden rack nailed into the wall near the doorway, a simple thing holding a bunch of old keys that came with the house. Some were small, others were long and heavy, the kind of keys that probably once opened basement doors or ancient locks no one used anymore. My mom said they were part of the house's character. I found them interesting but slightly unsettling. They looked too old, too heavy, and too purposeful. That afternoon I was alone. The quiet was sharp, the kind of quiet that makes your ears ring. I was standing near the counter, doing nothing in particular, just looking out the window, maybe waiting for the kettle to whistle. Everything felt still. I remember hearing a soft clinking sound, like metal shifting against metal. At first I thought it was the pipes. The sound came again, this time a single crisp clink, like one of the keys had moved. I turned to look, and that was when it happened. One of the keys lifted off the rack and shot across the room. No wind, no vibration, no movement from me. It just flew. It wasn't a gentle fall or a slip. It was as if something had thrown it. The key hit the tiled floor near my feet with a sharp ring that echoed too long in the silence. I froze completely. I couldn't even breathe right. The room suddenly felt wrong. Too cold, too alert. My body was screaming to run, but my feet wouldn't move. I kept staring at the key lying there, heavy and dark against the white tile. I tried to convince myself I had imagined it. Maybe the nail was loose. Maybe the vibration from something outside made it fall. But even as I thought those things, I knew how the key had moved. It didn't drop. It didn't swing off. It flew, a straight path through still air, almost 8 feet across the kitchen. After a while, I forced myself to pick it up. The metal was freezing, even though it was summer, and the room had been warm just moments before it was old and slightly tarnished, like something that hadn't been touched in decades. There was no label, no indication of what it belonged to, just this heavy, unfamiliar key that had chosen to move on its own. I hung it back on the rack, half expecting something else to happen. Nothing did. The silence settled again, and for a few moments everything looked exactly as it had before, ordinary and calm. But that feeling of calm was ruined for me after that. The kitchen didn't feel the same anymore. Every time I passed that rack, I'd glance at it, waiting, listening. The sound of metal clinking started showing up in my sleep, sometimes faintly, sometimes loud enough to wake me. I tried to test it once. I stood there watching the keys for an hour straight. Nothing moved, no noise, just the low creak of the old house settling. I thought maybe I'd finally imagined the whole thing. Maybe stress or lighting played tricks on my eyes. I almost convinced myself of that, until one evening, I noticed something that made my stomach twist. The key wasn't where I had hung it. It had shifted slightly, as if it had been moved and placed back crookedly. From then on, I avoided that part of the kitchen. I'd grab what I needed and leave. Whenever the wind blew through the open window, I'd feel a draft that somehow avoided every other object in the room, but made the keys sway just enough to clink together. Too deliberate, too timed to be random. Years later, when I was older and we'd moved out, I thought back to that day. I can still hear that metallic sound in my memory. I've told the story a few times, always in the same way, because I don't have any explanation for it. People say it was probably vibrations, static electricity, maybe even air pressure from a slammed door. I've repeated all those reasons to myself countless times, but none of them explain how a single key lifted off its hook and flew in a perfect line across a silent room. No matter how much I try to rationalize it, I still feel that moment when the air shifted, when the stillness in that house wasn't just emptiness anymore, it felt aware. And to this day, I still can't shake the thought that maybe, just maybe, that old house hadn't been empty for a very long time. Story 2. They say some places remember things, like a sponge holding onto old water, even after being wrung out. That's how that forest felt to me. It wasn't evil, just heavy, as if it carried the memory of everything that had ever happened beneath its trees. I never believed in ghosts or any of that stuff, but that night changed how I see silence, shadows, and the spaces in between. I was about 16 when it happened. I used to wander a lot back then, especially in the woods behind town. It was where I went when things at home got loud or confusing. I liked how the forest swallowed sound, how it made you feel like you were nowhere at all. One afternoon, while hiking deeper than usual, I came across an old camper hidden between clusters of pine trees. The thing was half sunk into the ground, like it had been there for decades, vines wrapped around its sides, and a few saplings had grown so close they nearly pinned it in place. The windows were fogged over with grime, and the metal body was spotted with rust. It looked like it had been forgotten by everyone. I couldn't stop thinking about it. There was something both sad and fascinating about that abandoned camper, like finding a time capsule nobody meant to leave behind. So a few weeks later, I decided to spend a night there alone. It sounds stupid now, but I thought it would be peaceful. I packed a flashlight, a blanket, and some snacks, then started the hike late in the evening. I didn't plan it that way, but by the time I reached the forest's deeper stretch, the light had almost disappeared. My flashlight wasn't great, and the batteries were weak, so every few minutes it would dim and flicker. I nearly turned back twice, but something about the challenge of it kept me going. When I finally reached the camper, it looked even more decayed than I remembered. The air around it smelled like damp wood and rust. I had to tug hard on the door before it opened. It made a long, metallic screech that echoed through the trees. Inside, everything was coated in dust and cobwebs. The floor was soft in spots, the kind of softness that hints at rot. I found a space toward the back where the bed used to be. The cushions were long gone, but I laid my blanket over the wooden frame and tried to get comfortable. The air was cold and stale, and every sound, the creak of metal, the rustle of leaves outside, felt louder than it should have. I tried to sleep, but there was movement somewhere above me. When I shined the flashlight, I saw small eyes glinting from a hole in the ceiling rats. There were at least 3 of them, watching me in that unnerving, motionless way animals sometimes do when they're not afraid yet. I told myself it was fine. They'd stay up there, and I'd stay down here. Still, I kept the flashlight close. Hours must have passed. I remember waking up to a faint scratching noise. It wasn't from the ceiling this time. It was coming from outside near the base of the camper. Then came a heavy, uneven step, followed by another. The ground outside was covered in branches and dry leaves, so every movement made a soft crackle. I froze, listening. Whatever it was seemed to circle the camper slowly, stopping near the back window before continuing on. I thought it might be a bear, or maybe a deer, so I stayed still. After a few minutes, the sound faded. I was half asleep again when I felt it. A faint vibration through the metal walls, like something brushing against them. Then silence. I don't know what made me open my eyes, but when I did, I noticed movement across the camper. At the far end, there was a narrow window, dirty but just clear enough for the moonlight to seep through. That's when I saw it, a figure standing outside, its outline sharp against the pale light. It looked like a man, tall and completely still, facing directly toward me. I thought maybe it was my reflection, so I sat up, moving slightly. The shape reacted. It shifted just a bit, like it had realized I'd seen it, then froze again. For a long time, neither of us moved. My flashlight was within reach, but I was too scared to grab it. The air inside the camper felt heavy, pressing down on me. I tried to rationalize it. It could have been a trick of the light, a shadow, a tree, anything. But deep down, I knew it wasn't. The posture, the way it stood, too deliberate, too human. Then as suddenly as it appeared, the figure bent slightly forward, as if leaning closer to the window. My heart pounded so hard it made my chest ache. I must have blinked because when I looked again, the window was empty. Nothing moved outside. The only sound was the wind dragging through the trees. I waited staring until my eyes burned. Then I did the only thing I could think of. I grabbed my things, opened the door, and ran. I didn't look back. I just ran until the forest started to thin and the faint orange glow of streetlights came into view. The next morning I went back in daylight, half convinced I'd find footprints or something that would make sense of it all. But the ground around the camper was undisturbed, not even animal tracks. I even checked the window. Nothing. No handprints, no marks. Just dirt and fog glass. Story 3. Sometimes houses feel like they breathe. The one I lived in back then seemed to exhale old memories through every crack in the walls. It sat on a quiet slope in Laguna Beach, built back in the 1920s. A strange, uneven structure that looked more like a patchwork than a proper home. People in the neighborhood said it used to be all sorts of things before someone decided to call it a house. Some mentioned it was a secret bar during Prohibition. Others swore it was a place for things no one wanted to talk about. To me, it was just cheap rent and close to the water. It was during the first few months after moving in that I started noticing how strange the house felt. The floors groaned in patterns that didn't match footsteps. Some nights I would hear what sounded like a drawer sliding open somewhere, but when I checked, nothing had moved. I blamed the ocean breeze, the old wood, anything that made sense. It was an old house. Old houses make sounds. That's what I told myself every time something felt off. One afternoon, things escalated from odd to unforgettable. My partner had stormed out to cool off after an argument, leaving me alone. The silence that followed was heavier than usual. The air felt thick, like the house itself was listening. I remember standing near the dresser in the bedroom, sorting through some things, when I saw a flicker of movement at the edge of my vision. I turned, expecting to see my reflection in the mirror, but instead my eyes caught something farther away, down the hallway. The layout of that house was strange. The bedroom faced a narrow corridor that led through a bathroom and into another hall on the far side. So from where I stood, I could see straight through several rooms in a line. At first, I thought it was a shadow from the window blinds swaying, but then it moved differently. It wasn't still. It was small, maybe 3 feet tall, and shaped like a person, but not really. Its form looked like someone had taken a black crayon and scribbled fast in midair, leaving behind this restless shape made of twitching lines. The thing wasn't solid, but it wasn't transparent either. The movement inside it looked like static electricity, like the air was alive. I froze. My first thought wasn't fear, it was confusion. I kept staring, trying to make sense of it. Maybe a trick of light, a shadow from a car outside, but then the figure seemed to shift, as if it realized I could see it. The air in the hallway changed. Everything felt charged, like just before lightning strikes. Then it started moving toward me. Not walking, rushing. The black lines in its body seemed to swirl faster, and it came straight down the hallway, fast enough that I didn't even think to react. My whole body went cold. I couldn't breathe, couldn't even move. It wasn't until the thing hit the doorway of the bathroom that something impossible happened. The bathroom door, which had been wide open, slammed shut so violently that the frame rattled. That sound broke the spell. My body finally caught up to the fear, and I stumbled backward, heart hammering so loud it drowned out everything else I shouted instinctively, expecting someone to answer. But there was no one. The whole house went dead silent again. The air felt empty. I remember running out the front door and standing in the driveway, staring at the open windows like I could still see it moving behind them. My hands wouldn't stop shaking. I stayed outside until my partner came back about 10 minutes later. She found me pale and out of breath, refusing to go inside until I wasn't alone. Later that evening, when we finally went back in, everything looked normal. The bathroom door was still closed, but it didn't look like anything had touched it. The hallway was quiet. No marks, no sign of what I saw, just stillness. For days afterward, I tried to rationalize it. Maybe I'd been stressed. Maybe sunlight had hit the hallway mirror weirdly. Or maybe it was one of those moments where your brain fills in blanks with imagination. But none of those explanations fit what I saw or what I felt. That pressure in the air before it moved, that sudden slam of the door, it all felt too deliberate. I lived in that house for another 6 months and nothing like that ever happened again. But the memory never left. Even now, years later, when I think about it, I can still picture that moving scribble, that moment when it turned its focus on me. I've told this story a few times and people always ask if I believe in ghosts. I usually say I don't. I want to believe there's a logical explanation. Maybe there was, but deep down, a part of me knows I saw something real, something I can't explain and maybe never will. Story 4. I've always thought of houses like people. Some are warm and welcoming. Others have a presence that makes you uneasy, even before you step inside. A few years ago, I rented a house that immediately felt like it belonged to the latter. From the moment I moved in, I had this odd feeling, like the walls were listening. At first, I brushed it off as anxiety from moving into a new place, but things quickly got stranger. Every night as I lay in bed, I could hear music. Not the kind that comes from a radio or any speaker I owned, just music floating somewhere in the distance. There were no words, no melody I could place, only the low hum of some invisible instrument. It was faint but constant, and it would always stop the moment I tried to get up to find it. I started to dread going to sleep because the sound seemed to grow more insistent, like it wanted me to notice it. My dreams became impossible to ignore. Night after night, I saw a crowd of faceless people, and in front of them stood a little boy. He didn't speak, but his presence was heavy, like he was trying to show me something I couldn't understand. The faces behind him never moved or reacted. They were just there, observing. I would wake up with the impression that the boy had left a message for me, though I couldn't remember what it was. It wasn't just dreams or sound that unnerved me. The fridge in the kitchen would sometimes open on its own, just a crack at first, but enough to make me tense. My cats, who had always been calm, began hissing at corners of the living room for no apparent reason. The oddest thing was the smell. Cigarette smoke drifting from the back room every day at exactly 3 in the afternoon, even though no one in the house smoked. I couldn't explain any of it, and yet I felt the house itself was trying to tell me something. My aunts, who were obsessed with ghost hunting, suggested we set up cameras one night. I was reluctant, but curiosity won. That night, we left cameras in the living room and on the front porch. Nothing seemed to happen at first, but when we checked the footage the next morning, one camera had spun in circles on its own for about 15 seconds. The strangest part was the front porch light. It turned on at 3 in the morning, bright enough to feel warm, and then slowly faded away. I tried to rationalize it, maybe a short circuit or a misaligned camera, but it felt deliberate, like the house itself was sending signals. After 2 years, I finally moved out. I expected relief, but the first night in my new place, I couldn't sleep. I missed the music, even the eerie, unplaceable music. It was as if the house had been part of my life in a way I couldn't describe. Looking back, I can't say for sure what was happening in that house. I told myself it was the imagination running wild, that cats can be spooky, and appliances sometimes act up. But part of me knows something else was there. Something that wanted to be heard. Something that left its mark on me. Even now, I sometimes wonder if the little boy from my dreams is still out there, waiting for someone else to notice him, to hear the music he plays when no one is looking. Story 5. The night was unusually still, the kind of quiet that feels like the air itself is holding its breath. I was driving down a narrow, winding road outside of Guatemala City, tasked with something that should have been simple: pick up a coffin from a small village west of the city and deliver it in time for the ceremony. The sun had long dipped below the horizon, leaving the countryside cloaked in shadows. I remember feeling a strange heaviness in the air, like the kind you feel just before a storm, but there were no clouds in sight. My truck sputtered and groaned, as if protesting the long drive, and eventually it gave out entirely on a stretch of road where no lights or houses were in sight. I cursed under my breath, knowing that if I didn't fix it quickly, I'd be late and someone would be furious. I got out, fiddling with the engine in the dim glow of my flashlight, when I noticed movement at the edge of the road. A man in a crisp suit appeared from the shadows, walking toward me with calm, measured steps. I barely registered being startled before he offered to help with the truck, his gestures precise, almost rehearsed. I didn't ask questions. I was too focused on getting the engine running again. Somehow, after a few tense minutes, the truck roared back to life, and the man simply turned and disappeared into the darkness without a word. It felt unnatural, the way he vanished, as if the night itself swallowed him whole. I drove on, haunted by the image of that man, the eerie calmness in his movements, and the way the air seemed to shift around him. When I finally arrived at the ceremony, I carried the coffin inside and helped place it on the table for preparation. People began arriving, softly murmuring their condolences, and I wandered around, still unsettled. I passed by the coffin to glance inside, more out of habit than curiosity, and froze. The man who had helped me with the truck was inside the coffin, lying there in perfect stillness. The resemblance was undeniable. The suit, the posture, everything. A cold shiver ran down my spine. I wanted to rationalize it, to tell myself it was some trick of light or my imagination after a long night. But deep down, I knew what I had seen. Every detail from earlier that morning replayed in my mind. The way he appeared out of nowhere, the effortless way he fixed the truck, the way he faded into the darkness. Even thinking about it now, the memory is sharp enough to make my skin crawl. I couldn't bring myself to ask anyone about it, and no one else seemed to notice anything unusual. I kept telling myself that maybe the man was someone who just happened to look like the person in the coffin, or maybe it had been my tired eyes playing tricks on me. But the timing, the posture, and the subtle, almost gentle aura of the man, it didn't make sense. Since that night, I've driven that stretch of road a few more times, always alone, always alert, always hoping to see a familiar silhouette helping someone, or maybe just to prove to myself that it had been nothing more than a dream. But no matter how many times I replay it, the memory refuses to fade. There's a weight to it, like the air on that road never fully returned to normal after the truck broke down. I've tried to convince myself that it was a coincidence, that the mind can play cruel tricks when you're tired and nervous. And maybe it was, but the details are so precise, so vivid, that part of me will always wonder if I really did encounter something that exists just beyond explanation. Story 6. I have always thought the night carries its own rhythm, like a slow heartbeat that only a few people can feel. About 10 years ago, I was walking home alone on a familiar street, a route I had taken hundreds of times without incident. The night was quiet, too quiet, with only the occasional rustle of leaves and the distant hum of streetlights flickering overhead. I remember feeling oddly disconnected from the world around me, like I was moving through a thin layer of mist that muffled everything. As I approached the corner near Elm Street, a chill crawled up my spine. Something about the air seemed thicker, heavier, though I couldn't tell why. I shook it off as nerves and kept walking. Then the strangest thing happened. I was suddenly back at the point I had just passed, about 200 meters behind, and everything looked exactly the same. The same streetlight flicker, the same leaves rustling in the faint wind, the same smell of damp asphalt. I stopped and tried to convince myself I was imagining it, but it felt impossibly real. I remembered thinking that I must have just walked in a circle without noticing, but the distance and timing made no sense. I could almost hear myself asking what had just happened, though I didn't speak it out loud. The street around me felt wrong, as if the world had skipped a beat and then caught me in the wrong moment. As I continued walking, my mind raced, trying to piece together some logical explanation. Maybe my feet had unconsciously retraced their steps, or maybe it was just a trick of the brain, a memory overlap. Yet nothing about the movement felt voluntary. I distinctly remembered each step I had taken before suddenly being somewhere I should not have been. The shadows along the walls seemed to stretch in ways they hadn't before, and the air felt heavier, charged with an energy I couldn't name. Even the street sounds seemed slightly delayed, like a bad recording skipping forward and backward in time. For a while, I convinced myself I was just tired or stressed, that the repetition of the street was some odd hallucination brought on by fatigue. But the feeling in my chest, a tightness that wouldn't go away, told me this was something else. My hand instinctively reached for my phone, thinking I could check the time or call someone, but the screen lit up sluggishly, delayed as though the world itself was moving slower than it should. For a few moments, I couldn't even trust my own senses. My brain was telling me one thing, but my body was responding to something entirely different. I felt like I was caught between two moments that weren't supposed to exist side by side. By the time I finally reached the actual corner I had been heading toward before the anomaly, the street seemed normal again. Nothing was out of place. No shadows moved unnaturally. No sounds echoed wrong. Yet the memory of being yanked backward, of walking the same stretch twice in what felt like an impossible loop, stayed with me. I kept replaying it in my head, wondering if anyone else had ever experienced something like this. Maybe it was a minor lapse in perception, a trick my mind played on me, or maybe it was something else, something I couldn't explain. Even now, years later, I still feel a lingering unease whenever I pass that corner. I can't tell if it was a glitch in reality, a momentary tear in the fabric of the night, or just an overactive imagination fueled by darkness and solitude. Whatever it was, it left a mark on me. I can't walk that path at night without the same tight feeling in my chest, the same instinctive glance over my shoulder, half expecting to find myself back where I started. That one night made me believe that maybe the world holds more than we can see, that sometimes the ordinary becomes subtly, unnervingly extraordinary without warning. Story 7. Some nights feel heavier than others, like the air itself is filled with sticky molasses that slows down your thoughts. That particular evening, I was driving home from work, my mind already frayed from hours of staring at screens and dealing with deadlines. The streetlights flickered weakly, like tired fireflies, and the quiet of the nearly empty side street was almost suffocating. My car hummed along, tires crunching softly on the asphalt, and I could feel my eyelids drooping as the long drive stretched ahead of me. There wasn't much traffic except for a few lumbering semi-trucks that rumbled down the road, leaving streaks of red taillights behind them. It felt like the world had shrunk to the confines of my windshield, and I was the only soul left moving through it. Out of nowhere, in the dim glow of my headlights, I noticed something rolling along the edge of the street. At first, it looked like a dark, shapeless mass, and my brain tried to categorize it. My tired mind immediately thought it was a rock, one of those jagged ones that could punch a hole in a tire if hit just wrong. I slowed slightly, debating whether to swerve, and a sense of irrational dread crept over me. Why was it rolling in such a straight line? How could a rock roll that smoothly? It made no sense. My imagination started running wild, coming up with all sorts of scenarios, each more ridiculous than the last, as my car drew closer. By the time I was almost level with it, I could finally make out the shape. It was a square, soft-looking object, bouncing and turning just enough to keep moving straight, almost like it had been trained to follow the road, and then it clicked. It was a throw pillow, a simple brown decorative pillow rolling beside me as though it had a life of its own. I blinked, convinced my eyes were playing tricks on me. There was no wind, no other cars pushing it along, nothing to explain why a pillow would behave like a perfectly engineered wheel. I drove past it, keeping an eye over my shoulder, and it continued down the street in the same eerily straight path, disappearing into the darkness like it had somewhere urgent to go. For the rest of the drive, my mind couldn't shake the image. A pillow doesn't roll that way. Physics doesn't allow for it, unless it's some kind of elaborate prank, or something else entirely. Every little sound on the road made me jump. I kept glancing at the side of the street, half expecting it to appear again, maybe even follow me. The rational part of my brain insisted it had to be explainable. A gust of wind, a slope in the street, maybe even an animal underneath that moved it. But the way it moved didn't fit any of those explanations. It was too precise, too deliberate, too impossible. The strangest part wasn't just the rolling itself, though. It was the feeling it left behind, a sense that something had touched that empty, quiet stretch of road just for me to see. Like a presence had been there, fleeting, playful, or even curious. I laughed nervously to myself, telling myself it was ridiculous, and yet even now, I find myself wondering if the pillow was just a pillow, or if it was something else that couldn't be seen but insisted on being noticed. I keep thinking about that straight, determined roll, and every time, the hair on my arm stands up. It was mundane, yet completely unexplainable, and I'll never forget it. Story 8. The night had a strange, heavy stillness, like the air itself was holding its breath. I was in my room, lost in the glow of my video game screen, when the world outside seemed to dissolve into quiet. After a few hours, I finally shut everything off and lay down, thinking I would drift off easily. That's when it happened. I felt something near me, like a whisper brushing against my ear, and a voice spoke words I couldn't fully place, saying that I shouldn't be worried because someone or something was there. It wasn't just a sound. I could feel the movement of air, almost like someone exhaling close to me. My heart started racing, and I sat frozen, staring into the dark ceiling, wondering if my mind was playing tricks. But the sensation was far too vivid to be imagined. For the next several months, the nights became increasingly unsettling. Around the same hour every night, there would be a soft knocking at my bedroom door. It wasn't loud or urgent, more like a careful check, as if something wanted to know if I was awake without actually waking me. I would call out, asking who was there, and get nothing in return. Every time I opened the door, the hallway was empty. At first, I thought maybe it was the wind or a creaky hinge, but it happened night after night without fail. Even when I had friends over, they would hear it too, and no one could explain it. It started to wear on me, and I found myself hesitant to go to sleep, unsure what awaited in the darkness. Then came the shadow. One evening, just as I was climbing into bed, I noticed something in the corner of the room, a figure so dark that it swallowed the light around it. It swayed back and forth slowly, almost like a pendulum, and it didn't match anything in my room. My imagination tried to rationalize it, but it didn't feel like imagination. The sense of being watched grew heavier, pressing into my chest, and I couldn't bring myself to stay in the room. I spent the night sitting up, waiting, listening, my ears straining for any sound beyond the quiet swaying. It was the kind of thing you can't fully explain, but it leaves an imprint on your mind that you can't shake. The next morning, I finally told my parents about it. I expected disbelief, maybe a laugh or a shrug, but my mom's eyes went wide, and she admitted that she had experienced something strange too. While we were talking, the back door suddenly swung open with a force that made it slam shut immediately. It was the kind of door that usually required effort to move, not something that could just fling itself. That single moment changed everything. After that, the knocking stopped, the shadow never appeared again, and for the first time in months, the room felt normal. I did a little research afterward, trying to find some logical explanation. I learned that occasionally unexplained phenomena are reported near wooded areas, and our house backs onto a forest. Could it have been animals? Could it have been a trick of the wind? Maybe. But after months of hearing and feeling these things in ways that seemed too precise and too intentional, I couldn't help but wonder if there was something else at play. Something unseen, observing from the edges of my room, waiting quietly until I noticed it. Even now, when I walk past that corner, I feel the faintest shiver, a reminder that not everything in the world follows rules we understand. Story 9. The night had a strange quietness, like the world had paused for a moment I couldn't explain. The kind of stillness that presses against your ears, makes shadows feel heavier, and turns the familiar into something a little off. I was in bed, drifting between sleep and wakefulness, when a face I hadn't seen in years appeared in my dream. It wasn't a frightening image, just someone I recognized instantly, someone who had always been part of my life. In the dream, they moved close to me, and there was a sense of urgency in their presence, almost as if they needed me to understand something before I fully woke. They reached out and touched my upper arm near the shoulder. The sensation was so real that it pulled me awake in an instant, and I felt completely alert, as though I'd been jolted from a deep state of rest. My body was tense, and a shiver ran across my back as I sat up and glanced at my arm. I got out of bed, trying to shake off the odd dream, and made my way to the bathroom. The floor felt colder than usual under my feet, the tiles pressing against my toes in a way that made me hesitate mid-step. When I reached the mirror and looked at my reflection, my stomach dropped. There, on my upper arm, exactly where the figure had touched me in the dream, was a single letter, written backward, as if someone had pressed a pen against my skin and traced it deliberately. I froze, staring at it, and the more I looked, the colder my arm felt. It wasn't just a little chill. It was a deep, penetrating cold that seemed to seep into my bones. The letter seemed impossibly real and completely unexplainable. I ran through every possible explanation. I don't sleepwalk. I keep my bedroom door locked, and the bathroom is down the hall. I don't leave pens lying around my room. All the pens were in another locked room, and I checked them. None were missing. None could have been moved. I considered that maybe I had unconsciously written it in my sleep, but the exact placement, the backward formation, and the icy sensation made that impossible to accept. My logical mind tried to find a reason. Maybe it was a trick of light, maybe a smudge, but nothing matched what I was seeing. It felt deliberate, precise, and cold, and the timing with the dream was too exact to dismiss as coincidence. I touched the letter lightly, and the coldness seemed to intensify, making my skin crawl. My heart was racing, but I didn't feel fear in a dramatic way, more like a profound unease. My logical mind told me to grab my phone and take a picture, but an instinct stopped me. Something about documenting it made it feel wrong, as if fixing it in a digital frame would trap something that shouldn't be trapped. I washed it off quickly, and as soon as the ink disappeared, the cold slowly left my shoulder. My skin warmed back to normal, but the feeling of being watched lingered. It was subtle, almost imperceptible, but it was there. Even after the ink was gone, the sensation of that touch and the urgency of the dream stayed with me, making me question everything I thought I knew about reality. I've told a few people about it, and most of them suggest I was dreaming too vividly, or my mind played a trick on me. But I can't shake the image of the backward letter, perfectly aligned with the touch in the dream. It was a singular moment that felt outside of normal experience, something that logic and reasoning couldn't fully explain. I've never been a believer in the paranormal, but that night, standing in front of the bathroom mirror with an icy shoulder and a perfectly traced mark, I couldn't help but wonder if maybe some things exist beyond what we can see or understand. Even now, thinking about it sends a shiver down my spine, and I'm left with that same uncomfortable question. Was it just my mind, or was there something else there with me? Story 10. The highway stretched ahead like a ribbon of black silk under a crescent moon, and I felt the kind of exhaustion that makes your eyelids feel glued together. I was on the road for work, traveling to a wind farm job in Iowa, and the plan was to drive straight through nearly 19 hours in a single shot. By the time I neared Waterloo, fatigue was pressing down on me from every angle. I pulled into a gas station, my body craving even a few moments of rest, and I started searching for rest stops on my GPS. There was almost nothing until the map eventually suggested a tiny spot in Gilbertsville. It was supposed to be just a short detour, but nothing about it seemed right. I followed the GPS directions down a dirt road, the headlights slicing through the thick darkness, when a strange tension settled over me. It wasn't just the usual weariness. It was the kind of feeling that grips you in the pit of your stomach, making every hair on your arm stand at attention. My eyes caught movement off to the side of the road, past a wooden fence in the shadowy field. It didn't have a clear shape, just a black blur that seemed to defy definition. As I watched, it started moving toward the car, gliding as if the air itself didn't resist it. My instincts screamed at me to get out, and I slammed the accelerator. Even in my exhausted state, I felt a surge of adrenaline as the car surged forward. It was as if something was following me, sliding through the fields behind the fences and keeping pace with my car in ways that made no sense. The engine roared, tires spinning against the gravel, and I barely dared to glance in the mirrors, convinced I'd see the figure gliding there behind me. My mind raced, trying to rationalize it. Was it a trick of the light, a shadow, or just my exhaustion playing cruel games? But even as I questioned myself, the feeling of being followed didn't ease. Every instinct told me that stopping or slowing down wasn't an option. For miles, the stretch of road seemed endless. The figure stayed there, somewhere at the edge of my vision, and I forced myself not to look directly at it. Every passing fence, every dip in the road, only made the hair on the back of my neck rise higher. I tried to convince myself it was fatigue or imagination, but nothing in my experience had ever produced such an overpowering sense of being watched and pursued. The dirt road turned into a ribbon of fear that I couldn't escape fast enough, and I pushed the Camaro harder, feeling the tires dig into the gravel, leaving trails behind like desperate marks of flight. Eventually, I reached the edge of Gilbertsville, and the sensation began to fade as the open road swallowed the shadows behind me. By the time I was back on a proper highway, the heavy sense of dread had dissipated, leaving a lingering unease in its wake. I never saw the figure again, and I've told myself it was probably fatigue, the stress of driving alone, or a trick of the headlights on the uneven fields. But the memory of that black, shapeless presence, moving toward me with impossible intent, is still vivid. Even now, when I think about taking that route again, a small knot of anxiety tightens in my stomach. Something about that place didn't feel right, and I'm not willing to test it a second time. I've driven in all kinds of conditions, alone at night, and I've never experienced a fear like that before or since. Maybe it was my mind bending under exhaustion, or maybe there's something out there that can't be explained by logic. I don't have an answer, and I'm not sure I want one. The only certainty is that whatever I saw that night was real enough to make me believe that not all things we encounter on empty roads are meant to be understood or ignored.